Okay, hello and welcome to another lesson on Facebook Live. And if you're just joining in, I'm glad to have you here. And before we begin today's lesson, if you have already attended previous lessons, I think it would be a good idea for you to have some sort of a note-taking device, or basically a pencil and paper ready to jot down any notes that you might find quite helpful as we go through the lessons. Okay, so I'm not really sure if we're going to squeeze everything all in 60 minutes for today, but we'll try our best to get on with the lesson as quickly as possible. Okay, and today's topic will be on how to introduce and organize your opinions, particularly in speaking part 3, because this is an area that a lot of IELTS candidates seem to be struggling with. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down into looking at how to apply useful language to organize what you say, so that your responses sound more fluent and the examiner will be able to understand quite easily what you're trying to communicate. And we'll also take a look at pausing and chunking for better pronunciation. What this means is that we will be looking at grouping your words together, because even if you have fantastic grammar and vocabulary, if you're not able to deliver your ideas well, if you speak in a monotone, or if you speak using individual words without pausing for effect, that might reflect in the low band score that you'll get for pronunciation. Unfortunately, in the test report form, you will not be given a breakdown as to what it is that's pulling your score down or pulling it up, so it's a good idea to cover all bases with speaking, particularly in the area of pronunciation, where it is commonly overlooked in favor of grammar and vocabulary. Okay, next we'll be looking at using intonation to sound more fluent. So grouping your words together, like pausing and chunking, is not really truly enough. You need to make sure that you have sufficient voice control to make sure that your voice goes up and down at certain areas in your speech, because if you don't already know it, English is it's a melodic language. It's a bit like singing, if you don't already know that. So voice control plays an important role in making sure that you deliver your information quite well. And then we're going to take a look at how to predict the future, particularly in part 3 questions, when they will ask you, or they may ask you, questions about what you will think will happen in 10 years' time in certain areas of education or tourism about your country. So we'll look at some common questions and see how we can best answer these types of questions. Okay, so let's get started. Now, just a little bit of exam information for you. In part 3, the examiner will say, I will now ask you some general questions. Okay, what this means is that you should not talk personally about yourself. Okay, you should have covered personal information in part 1 and part 3 of your answers. But for part 3, you can use your personal experiences as a common example, but make sure that you show this clearly in the language you use. So you should not be saying things like, I remember when I was a little boy, we used to have we can choose different types of subjects to study, which is fine, but it would sound a lot better if you say, in my country, when you reach a certain age or a certain level at school, a lot of students are able to choose different types of subjects that they would like to study. So that sounds more of, you know, giving out, showing you your knowledge rather than personal experiences when you argue your opinions in part 3. Okay, here's an example that you can see on the screen here. Most people in my country, like myself, enjoy being competitive, especially when it comes to sport. But I feel competition is important in many areas, such as business, so it's not exclusive to sport. Oh, okay. So it's not exclusive. Sorry, I think there's a typing mistake there. All right. So this sounds more like you're giving general information rather than talking about your own personal experiences. So the only thing that's personal about it is this one here. In my country, like myself. And then you move on to talking about how you feel about it. Okay? Also, in part 3, you need to think about or to talk about the world as a whole. And as much as possible, try to use global examples where possible. Okay? For example, you can say, I think the problem of traffic in cities is something that can be seen on an international scale in most major cities in the world, especially in countries like the UK and the USA. Okay? So rather than talking about in my country all the time, try to think of it more, try to think of the issue as a whole, as a global problem, rather than at a local or national level. Okay, so in that way, you would be able to show that you know, your arguments will come across as coming from someone more knowledgeable about the topic, about the world, rather than about something exclusive like you know, the country where you are or where you come from. Okay. Now let's take a look at how we could structure what we say. When in part 3, when you give your response, try to introduce your ideas with a sentence structure. Okay, and as you can see on the screen, you can add extra information if you want. You can support your main idea by adding some extra information. What I mean by extra information is give an example or give a reason. So you can start off your response by saying, basically, I feel that, and then give your main idea. It's not only the government's responsibility to solve the problems caused by heavy traffic, and then you give why it's not the government's responsibility by providing a reason. So the reason here would be your extra information. The main reason behind my thinking this is that the general public has to accept the part they have to play. If we don't all work together, then the problem will never go away. So structuring your answers can come in 3 parts. The sentence starter, your main idea over here, and you can either provide further explanation or give a reason or an example of which countries around the world are facing the problems of heavy traffic, or which countries around the world are using their government's resources to solve the problems caused by heavy traffic. Okay? So this is one way of structuring your answer, by supporting your main idea with an example or a reason. Now, if you are unsure of what sort of sentence structures to use, if you're looking for something that's less commonly used, you can have a look at this list here. Okay? So the list that you see shows you how to introduce your ideas and opinions, apart from the usual phrase, basically I feel that. You can use a conditional structure. If it were up to me, I would, but like I said, try not to make this as a personal narrative, and try to think about the issue as a global responsibility. But yeah, don't go on to talk about yourself too much. Okay, so you can see the rest of the expressions here that you could use instead of I think, I feel, I believe, I'm convinced, and all those common structures. So what examiners are particularly looking for are examples of less commonly used expressions. So if you think you could get away with using things like, without a doubt, I feel that the issue of traffic comes from blah blah blah, or the thing we need to be looking at is this, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this requires some practice from you to look at some common Part 3 questions and trying to incorporate these expressions into your answers. So try to record your voice as much as possible using these expressions. And here we've got more examples of the expressions, how you can use them. So you could say something like, basically I feel that advertising can make people buy things. Or, if it were up to me, I'd put a higher tax on big cars to try and encourage people to use public transport more. To me, what we need to be focusing on is how to make our economy stronger. Or, I think governments should, I think there's a typing mistake here, should put more money into adults' education. Okay, let me just correct that. Okay? Or, I think most people feel that women are just as capable of managing a company as men. I truly believe that we will find an alternative energy source in the future. Or one example that springs to mind is how winter can make you or make someone feel more depressed because there is not much sunlight. And finally, there are several reasons why, okay, again, there's a typing mistake, houses in hot countries are built this way. So if you're talking about things in general, it's best to use the plural form. There are several reasons why houses in hot countries are built this way. The first one is that they are designed to reflect heat, and so on and so forth. So you can continue with arguing your opinions a bit more. But these are just some examples of how these sentence structures could be used to begin giving your opinion. Okay, and here are some examples of the extra information that you could use to make your ideas clearer. As I've mentioned to you before, you could either provide further explanations or give reasons or examples. Okay, I'm not going to read through the list, but you can feel free to note this down in your notebook and try to use these in your recordings as you practice and using them before the actual test. Okay, so I hope that's quite useful for you. Now, what we're going to do next is to see if we can incorporate some of these expressions to complete some main ideas from Part 3 questions. Okay, let me just show you what I mean here. Hold on a second. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, now the first one has been done for you. A topic, that's quite common in Part 3 interviews. Children don't enjoy reading as much these days. So if you look back at the expressions that we have covered before, you could begin by saying, it would seem to me. Okay, so let me just highlight that. It would seem to me that children don't enjoy reading as much these days. Okay, in my country, for instance, so this is where you give your your examples. In my country, for instance, most children prefer to watch television or play computer games. To me, what we need to be focusing on, okay, so this is another sentence starter that we've looked at earlier. So here you provide your own opinion by using quite a forceful sentence starter here. So to me, what we need to be focusing on is educating parents and getting them to spend more time reading with their children. Okay? And here this is followed by an example. One relatively easy way to do this is by reading them bedtime stories. Okay? So, this is something that you could use to structure your opinion or what you want to say. So similarly, similarly you could use the other three topics in the same way. Advertising on the internet has more positive effects than negative ones. So, how do you think we could structure this one here? If you want to stick to the same phrases, you could say, well, it would seem to me that the internet has more of a positive influence, than a negative one. In my country, for instance, most people or most viewers prefer to go shopping, for example, and then you continue with all the rest. To me, what we need to be focusing on, blah blah blah. But of course, you should not use the same expressions each time you give a response to a different answer. Okay, so try to look back at the list that I have shown you here to begin giving your ideas and opinions. So we've looked at it would seem to me that. So you could say, I think we could look at this in a number of different ways, blah blah blah, and then give your main idea followed by a reason from one of these lists. From one of these expressions. Okay, so think about all the other topics. Families need to spend more time. How are you going to argue this? Or self-study is better than studying with a teacher. Okay, so what are your ideas on these? So you need to think about that and make sure that when you do answer that it is a minimum of 5 complex sentences if possible, because the main purpose of part 3 is for you to talk for as much as possible. Okay, and if you notice that your examiner keeps asking you to explain more, that means you're not speaking for long enough. But if you find that your examiner cuts you off mid-sentence or whatever, that's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done anything wrong. It just means that the examiner needs to get on with the next question. But this rarely happens in part 3. If you're talking for a long time, the examiner will usually let you have your way and keep talking, and maybe focus on certain things that you say and latch on to that information to ask you to explain further on what you mean by this or what you mean by that. Okay. Now, let's take a look at okay, the issue of pronunciation, particularly with pausing and chunking your information. Now, when we write, we use punctuation to make our writing easier to follow. Yeah, that's what we do. When we write either task 1 or task 2, we will be assessed on punctuation. So if you don't punctuate your sentences clearly, it'll be quite confusing for your examiner or for your reader to understand what it is that we're trying to say. So similarly, when we speak, we need to do the following here to make our ideas easier to follow. So we don't punctuate like in writing. Instead, we breathe. Okay? So when you're nervous, you may speak too quickly, and you may forget to breathe regularly. So this is an easy thing to say, but quite a difficult thing to do when you're feeling extremely nervous during the interview. I know I've said this to my students so many times, but you need to feel very relaxed in your interview. I've had students who've done the test 10, 11, 12 times, and they still feel very, very nervous when they're sitting in front of the examiner. This is something that you need to overcome. If you feel that drinking 10 cups of coffee will help you calm your nerves, then go ahead and drink 10 cups of coffee. But the good news is that the interview doesn't last for 14 hours. It only lasts for 14 minutes. So those nerves are not going to last for very long if you think of it that way. Okay? At the same time, you need to make sure that you pause at the right places. You should make sure that you do not speak too quickly or speak in a monotone. Sometimes what good speakers do is they pause for effect. So if you are, I think one way to practice this is to actually watch and observe some interviews that you see native speakers normally take part in. For example, in chat shows or in news interviews. Listen to how these speakers respond to interview questions. How do they pause? Do they forget to breathe regularly? So this is something that you need to observe and learn and emulate or imitate, because you can't just do something that you're not familiar with. If I tell you to pause at the right places, you would know when to pause, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, in English, there are no rules as where you should be pausing. One of my students, actually several of my students, have asked me, is there a rule as to where you need to pause when you speak? Unfortunately, there are no written rules as to when or where you need to pause when you give your responses. But the examiner will immediately notice pauses at awkward places, because this comes with getting used to what sounds right and what doesn't sound right. So to be able to implement this in your own speaking, you need to observe first how people do it before you can do it yourself. Okay, so observation plays an important part in understanding how it's commonly done in the native language. So you'd be able to do this well when you practice doing it yourself. So yeah, that's what you need to do. And thirdly, you need to break up what you say into logical chunks. That means you do not say your sentence out loud like a choo-choo train, you know, without any pauses or you know, or places where you need to take a deep breath. So what you need to remember is that if you pause in the wrong places, you could lose marks. Okay, because you will sound unsure of what you mean, and this will break your flow of ideas, and you will also sound unnatural. So the best way to do this is, like I said earlier, is to observe how native speakers do it when they answer interview questions. You know, watch certain celebrities. How do they answer questions when they're asked to talk about their movie, when they're promoting their film, for example. Or listen to some politicians talk about what they think about certain issues that are happening around the world. Or, watch certain chat shows that you enjoy watching and see how people answer or respond to questions. Okay? Right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an example of a candidate answering this part 3 question. Okay. Do you think the telephone is a popular form of communication? So these are the things that you need to watch out for as I demonstrate to you how this candidate talks. Okay, so let's take a listen. Yes, as you know, we live in an information age, and the communication is, we think people is so fast, and there are so many things that speed up your communicating with other people, like internet, like the phones, like so many things. But phone is, I think phone is more popular between them because the other people cannot use the internet for communicating, and they prefer to use the phones for communicate with other people, like emails and writing, mail. They prefer to use phones, and in my country they use it a lot because especially women would like to use it. Yes, I think women like to use it the most. Okay, so there you have it. That's an example of a candidate answering this question. So let's evaluate how you think this sort of answer performs. Does the speaker pause at the right places? No, not really. Because if you listen to the example again, there are pauses at different places that are not really very effective. Speed up your communicate. Okay, so speed up your, and then there's a slight pause, communicate. That sounds a bit awkward. So pauses there will probably, be penalized because they sound more hesitant than natural. Is their answer easy to follow? The quick answer to this is no. It's not easy to follow because the speaker hesitates quite often and pauses quite often as well, and not just pausing quite often, but pausing at the wrong places. Okay, does she sound like she knows exactly what she's talking about? Answer: no. Because of the uncertainty in the tone of her voice, as well as the frequent pauses that you heard, she did not sound like she knew exactly what she was talking about. Does the speaker sound natural? No, not really. Would this candidate get a good mark for fluency? No. Would this candidate get a good mark for pronunciation? Pronunciation, individual sounds, yes. But pronunciation in terms of pauses and stress points, I don't think so. Okay, because there are there's not much use of stress, and if you don't deliver on stress and intonation, I think you might be penalized for this. Okay, so pronunciation doesn't just mean pronouncing individual sounds clearly. You need to also make sure that you deliver using the right intonation, as well as stressing at the right places. Okay, I hope that gives you an idea of what you need to avoid when you give your responses. So here's a tip for you. Most excuse me, got a bad throat here. Most English phrases end with nouns and verbs. Okay, now nouns and verbs have the most final consonant clusters. What do I mean by consonant clusters? Consonants are the opposite of vowels, yeah, like B, C, D, G. So consonant clusters are two consonants joined together. For example, pick up those bags. Bags, G and Z. That's an example of a consonant cluster, G, Z. So some candidates find it quite difficult to pronounce consonant clusters, and I've noticed this quite a lot. So you need to make sure that when you pause at the end of a phrase, you have more time to pronounce those final consonants. So instead of saying pick up those bags, sometimes I'd hear people say pick up those bags. Or instead of saying I'd like to suggest, I'd hear I'd like to suggest, or suggest, without the ending of without the sound ending produced. So make sure that you have more time to pronounce final consonants, that just before you pause, you slow down a little bit and say, when they pick up those bags, or I'd like to suggest that, and so on. And at the same time, when you pause at the end of a phrase, you give yourself a little time to think. Okay, so instead of going all the time, those what do you call it, hesitation fillers, you pause. It could be a silent pause, so that you give yourself a little bit more time to think, maybe half a second. And when you pause at the end of a phrase, your intonation and rhythm will sound better. Okay? One good example would be to notice how I pronounce certain words. When I do this lesson myself, listen to how I pronounce certain words. I don't say, listen to how I pronounce certain words. I paused. Listen to how I pronounce, pause, certain words, pause. So you can see the difference there. So you can, if you feel that you don't know where to start observing people, start by observing how I speak, to see how the sort of language or the sort of ideas I deliver sounds a little bit better if I pause for effect, when I use my intonation and the rhythm in my voice. Okay, so this is something that you need to try and do before you sit for your test. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another part 3 question, and I would like you, if you have a pen and paper with you to make notes, I would like you to not really sure, to see if this candidate answers or is a better example of the one that we've looked at earlier. Okay, so the topic is, do men and women like to read different types of books? Okay. Yes, I think it's in this way because the nature of women and men are very different. So I think they choose different subjects and they have different tastes in reading. Yes, for example, I think women are very interested in reading novels that are based on love and affection. On the other hand, I think men are very interested to read books for example, the adventures and, for example, stories that are based on the travel of the person. I mean, biography, for example, and things like that. Okay, so what do you think of this particular example? What do you think of this performance? So let's take a look at question 1. Does she pause at the right places? In this case, it's a lot better because excuse me, because if you listen to the example again, there were pauses after the words yes, before the linking word. I think it's in this way because the nature of women and men, okay, and then there's a pause before the verb, are very different. Excuse me. Sorry, I had to sneeze there. Very different, and then another pause. So I think they choose different subjects, and they have different tastes in reading. So there is always a pause at the end of a sentence, but you can see that there are individual pauses between different groups of words, particularly before, I mean, if you want to put a rule to this, I think usually before the main verbs, and sometimes before the linkers. Mind you, try not to use these as rules to follow, because different people have different styles of speaking. So, but these are just common examples. So let's try it again. Let's listen to how I say it. Yes, I think it's in this way because the nature of women and men are very different. So I think they choose different subjects and they have different tastes in reading. Okay? So you can see that in that sentence alone there are a few pauses within that one sentence. It's actually one sentence long. Okay, so because of these pauses, her answers are easy to follow, or the candidate's answer is easy to follow. So the answer to question 2 is yes. Question 3, does she sound like she knows exactly what she's talking about? Yes, she sounds a lot more confident because the pauses seem to be at the right places. There seems to be, groups of words connected together rather than a separation of individual words. Does she sound natural? Yeah, absolutely. Would this candidate get a good mark for fluency? Yep, definitely a better mark than the first example I've shown you. Would this candidate get a good mark for pronunciation? Yes. And what would the candidate do to improve her answer? Okay, I think there were, if you listen to the example again, there were a couple of grammar mistakes, particularly in article use. But in terms of delivery, I think the example that I've shown you here is quite good because there is some use of pause, some use of intonation, as well as stress on certain areas as well. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the area of intonation next, because this is one area that's quite important. Apart from pausing and chunking, you will also be assessed on how well you use intonation in your voice when you deliver your answers, particularly in parts 2 and 3. So, intonation can show your attitudes and your feelings. Now, in English intonation, the voice usually goes up for a question and it falls to show that you have completed a statement. Okay, so here's a very quick tip. Now, English intonation is not monotone. It will be very difficult to follow what you're saying if your voice does not rise and fall naturally. So, make sure that you okay, the key word here is naturally. So when you do try to raise the pitch of your voice, or make sure that you use a falling intonation, make sure that they're at the right places, because otherwise you'll end up sounding like Mickey Mouse. Like I said to you before, make sure that you observe to develop an ear for the language, so that you'll notice that when you do have lessons or English lessons, and when you ask your teacher why is it right to do this and that, and sometimes your teacher can't really find the answer to that because it just doesn't sound right. Okay, so English is not like it's not a mathematical subject or a scientific subject where everything follows a rule. It doesn't. It's an evolving language, and it depends on individual speakers. When you talk, different people have different styles, but there's usually a common style that native speakers can relate to. And to do this, you need to do lots and lots of observation, followed by lots and lots of practice. So it's no use just observing people answering questions and noticing how well they answer these questions. If you don't do anything about it, you will not improve. So make sure that your observation is followed by regular recordings of your own voice, of your own performance to certain questions, to answering certain questions in part 2 or part 3. Okay? Let's see if I can give you another example. Okay, I'll let you listen to an example part 3 question over here. Should boys and girls be given the same toys to play with? Okay, a part 3 question there. So, as you listen, I would like you to observe whether the speaker's answer is easy to follow, whether they use intonation or they sound natural, good mark for fluency, pronunciation, and all of that. Okay, so here goes. Well, yeah, I think they should really, because they can play with toys just to have fun, and therefore if they just have any toy, they can have fun. It's about their imagination, really, I suppose. They can use anything as long as they have an imagination. It could be for girls or boys, as they have fun and use their imagination and have fun. Okay, now what do you think of this answer? It sounds okay. The speaker's answer is relatively easy to follow. They did use intonation, not very natural sounding though, because there were a few hesitations there and a few awkward pauses. But intonation, I think, is generally used quite well. Would this candidate get a good mark for fluency? Probably, but not a very high band score. Would this candidate get a good mark for pronunciation? Again, like number 4, they might, because individual sounds are pronounced clearly. Intonation is there, but I think because of the pauses, I think that made it a little bit it made it sound a little bit awkward. Okay, let me give you another example. Should boys and girls be given the same toys to play with? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course they should. I think parents should make sure that all children have the opportunity at least to, the boys can play with the dolls, or the girls could play with the guns and the cars and things like that. But I think what most parents will find is that the boys will go for the cars and the guns, and the girls are going to end up going for the dolls, because there is so much pressure from society and so much influence from society. So yes, they should have the option of those toys, but I don't think they should be surprised if their kids go for the traditional gender-based toys. Okay, now would you say that this second example is better than the first one? If you say yes, absolutely, because there is, I think a lot more meat to the answer. There's a lot more information, and stresses are used quite effectively. and also intonation as well. Okay, so try to make sure that your voice goes up and down. At the end of certain sentences, they should naturally fall down. In the middle of a sentence, sometimes your voice should go up for effect. So, yeah, try to practice that as much as you can. Okay, I think we're quickly running out of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on answering questions that involve predicting the future. Okay, now before I show you that, in the IELTS speaking test, you may need to make predictions about future events or situations, like in the example that I'm showing you here. Do you think traveling will still be necessary in the future? Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say the candidate's answer, and I would like you to fill in the gaps as you listen. Okay, so this is where your pencil or your pen might come in handy, and a piece of paper. So if you have your pen and paper ready, we shall start. Do you think traveling will still be necessary in the future? Well, I think there is every chance that people will still need to travel in the future, especially people like businessmen and politicians. Of course, video conferencing will most probably mean that lots of meetings can be done from the office. Now, having said that, I'm totally convinced that no future developments in technology will ever take away people's need to see new places firsthand and meet people face to face. The other thing is that families are also much further apart geographically today than they used to be. Different family members live and work abroad, and I think this trend will most likely continue in the future, which means people will have to travel to go and visit their families. Okay, did you get that? I hope you did. Okay, so number one, what do you think is the expression here? Okay, well, I think there is every chance. Okay, so let me just put it there. Hold on a second. Okay, there is every chance that people will still need to travel, blah, blah, blah. What did you get for number two? Of course, video conferencing will okay, if you put most probably mean, oops, yeah, then give yourself a pat on the back for that one. Okay, number three, having said that, what did you get for this one? Having said that, okay, here's your answer. Okay, I'm totally convinced that no future developments in technology, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and finally, I see a typing mistake there, geographically. Okay, number four, different family members live and work abroad, and I think this trend will most likely continue in the future. Okay? Alright, so if you've got all four expressions correct, well done. Okay, so your listening skills are up to standard. Well done there. Okay, so these are very common expressions that speakers normally use. There is every chance that people will still need to travel, or it will most probably mean, or I'm totally convinced, this trend will most likely continue in the future. So this is, these are quite useful expressions to have in your, in your vocabulary bank to try and use to enforce your arguments a little bit more, to make your opinions sound very convincing. So try to use this, in the right context when you give your own answers in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit more practice on this. Again, if you've got your pen and paper right next to you, that would be very, very useful. Because in the next exercise, I would like you to take a look at these expressions from number 1 to number 11 to figure out which category they go under. Whether the speaker is very sure about what they're saying, or fairly sure, or not sure at all. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to look through this. I'm just going to start my timer for 2 minutes. Okay, that's about 2 minutes now, so let's see if you have categorized them in the right at the right places. Okay, so number 1, I'm not actually sure if or whether, so obviously this goes in that category there. Number 2, there's no doubt in my mind that, so this sounds like the speaker is actually very sure. I would most definitely say that, okay, that also sounds quite confident. There is a good chance that, okay, that sounds like the speaker is fairly sure, not 100%, but fairly sure. I'm absolutely convinced that, okay, that shows that the speaker is very, very convinced. It's impossible to say if or whether, so here the speaker seems like he doesn't really know about the issue very much. No one really knows if, again, not very sure. There is a very real possibility that there's a very real possibility. I think that would be under I'm fairly sure. 50%. Okay. I don't really know if that would be under I'm not sure. I truly believe that, okay, the speaker here shows that he's very sure about it. And it could be said, it might be said, that shows some uncertainty. Okay? So, using these expressions depends on your degree of certainty. If you're absolutely sure about something, about an issue, go ahead and use these phrases to talk about what you feel about something. If you're not sure, 100% sure about whether or not this will work or not, then just use these expressions here. And if you're about, if you're sitting on the fence, 50-50, you're fairly sure, but not entirely sure, or 100% sure, you can use these couple of expressions here. Now, how do we use these expressions in the context of a sentence? Let's take a look at some example questions. Okay, you can see here from number 1. Okay, where will most people live in the future? You can use this expression here. There is a good chance that we have, oops, I think there again is a typing mistake, that we'll have the same number of people living in both urban and rural areas. So you could begin your sentence in this way, if you're fairly sure. Is it likely that we will still be reading books in paper form in the future? It's impossible to say if people will prefer digital books in the future, as I think that many people still prefer reading printed material to reading from a tablet, a phone, or a computer. Okay, so you can use this expression here to start off your opinion. Will people in your country have a healthier diet in 10 years' time? There is a very real possibility that we'll be suffering from obesity in about a decade from now. Notice that I have not copied the same words as in the question, because this is what normally, when responding to your examiner's answers, try not to parrot the examiner's questions. In other words, try not to repeat the same words as what the examiner says to you. So the difference between, a good speaker and a not so good one is the good speaker tries very hard to use their own words or to just get straight to the point, whereas the speaker who is not very confident will normally repeat the same words in the question. So, for example, in number 3, will people in your country have a healthier diet in 10 years' time? Try not to say, I think there's a very real possibility that people in my country will have a very unhealthy diet in 10 years' time. Okay, compare that to the answer in red, which is slightly better, because it avoids parroting the examiner's words. Okay, here are some more questions. Do you think businessmen and women will still travel abroad for meetings in the future? So you can start off by saying, there is no doubt in my mind that any business meetings or conferences will be done virtually in the future. Okay. Do you think that people in the future will still want to learn about the history of their country? I truly believe that a country identifies and prides itself on its local heritage, which is why I'm convinced that history will be preserved for future generations to come. Okay? Or, what will be the most serious problem cities will have to face in the future? So if you're very, very certain, you could say, I would most definitely say that overcrowding will be an issue among a lot of cities, or in a lot of cities. Okay? And here are some more expressions that you can use. But what I would like you to do instead is to listen to an example candidate talking about his future study plans or her future study plans. And I would like you to see what expressions he uses or she uses from here. number 1 to number 8. Did they use all of it or some of it? So I'm going to demonstrate a candidate's answer about their future study plans, and I would like you to observe what expressions does she use. Okay, you can just put a tick next to the expressions that you hear being used. Okay, here we go, talking about future plans. Well, next year I intend to start business studies course at college here in London. The course is 2 years, so I hope it will help me to get a good job after I graduate. That's the main purpose, in fact. But also, I hope to develop contacts in international business and English. I hope to develop contacts in international business, and English is a big part of the course, so that's another benefit. Okay, shall I say that again? Right, just one more time. Well, next year I intend to start business studies course at college here in London. The course is 2 years, so I hope it will help me to get a good job after I graduate. That's the main purpose, in fact. But also, I hope to develop contacts in international business, and English is a big part of the course, so that's another benefit. Okay, so what did you hear? What expressions did you hear? Did you hear I aim to? No. What about I intend to? Yeah, so the candidate used I intend to start business course. Okay, what I hope to develop from this is, did you hear that? The candidate said, I hope to develop contacts. So yes. My main goal is to. Did you hear this? My main goal is to. No. What about the main focus is to? No. Okay. What about I hope it'll help me to? Yes, the candidate did mention this. The course is 2 years, so I hope it will help me to get a good job. So yes. The main purpose is to. Did you hear that? Well, the candidate did say that's the main purpose, in fact. So let's just put it as yes, but not in that same structure. What I hope to achieve from this is. Did you hear that? Okay, no, the candidate did not mention this at all. Okay, so you can use these expressions here very nicely to talk about your plans for the future. So predicting the future is something that is quite commonly asked in part 3 in IELTS Speaking. So try to use some of these expressions, not repetitively, but try to vary the sort of expressions that you use. Okay. Now here I've got a list of possible part 3 topics that you could do some research on. Maybe watch some interviews about people talking about the media, journalism, and so on. So try what you should try and do is to try to build vocabulary around these topics. Okay, now remember that the vocabulary that you use for part 3 speaking is formal. It's quite similar to the writing style that you need for task 2. Of course, this list is not the final list. You can keep adding to the list as much as you can. There are also other topics apart from these. So, like I said, try to dedicate a little bit of time to building your vocabulary around these topics, so that you'll have a better idea of what to say when you respond to your examiner's questions, and focus on how you deliver your answers as well. So hopefully you have found today's lesson on how to structure your answers, on how to pause and chunk your, using pausing and chunking for pronunciation, intonation, some examples of, good and bad responses, predicting the future. I hope these have been quite useful for you. So we're going to stop here for now because I think we're 5 minutes past the time. So if you do need any help with your IELTS preparations, please feel free to visit my website here at the IELTStutor.com and try to not leave any preparations to the last minute, as a lot of failing candidates tend to do. Okay, unfortunately, I'm not able to help with candidates who tell me that they need a band score improvement, in about a day or a week. So if your IELTS exam is tomorrow, there's nothing much I can do to help you with improving your band score. But make sure that you do not leave any preparations or professional help to the last minute. Not just with me, but with anybody else. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have benefited greatly from today's lesson. So, I hope everything's been useful for you, and I look forward to speaking with you or talking to you again soon. All right, have a good start to the week. Bye-bye for now.